Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 20 of What to Think. My name is Dylan Tweeney. I'm the editor-in-chief of VentureBeat.
And I'm Jordan Ovett, a staff writer.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode. Today, we'll be talking to Kathleen McGee. She is the head of the New York Attorney General's Internet Bureau, responsible for helping hold companies like Uber, Facebook, and Airbnb responsible for their actions online. And we'll have some interesting things from her. But first, here's some tech news highlights from VentureBeat.com.
Wait, Dylan, I heard from a bird in the tree that it's your birthday. Happy birthday, Dylan!
Well, thank you. By the time all the good people are listening to this, it will no longer be my birthday, but I appreciate the thought, Jordan.
We are all wishing you happy birthday all day, and we'll continue to for the next 8 hours.
Okay, so it'll be like my birthday week then. I'm sure like 3 days from now when somebody's listening to this podcast, they'll send me an email saying happy birthday, and then that'll be awesome.
Dylan deserves all your birthday wishes, people.
Well, let me tell you what I did for my birthday. I went down to Cupertino.
Oh, why?
Where Apple was holding a huge event to announce their new iPhone 6s and their new Apple Watch that everyone expected. And
it was so crazy.
Finally delivered on.
What was it like there? Because I only followed along on Twitter. I was at Intel's big developer forum. So what was it like down there?
Well, it's a typical Apple event where it's just a big scrum of press and Apple fanboys waiting to get in. This was at the Flint Center in Cupertino, which I understand is the place where they announced the original Mac. And Apple has not used it very much since then. They've done most of their events in a smaller venue up in San Francisco. So this was much larger. It's a huge audience, lots and lots of hype. I think probably the most significant Apple announcement I've seen in the last 3 years.
For sure. I mean, it's Tim Cook like doing his first big product launch, right?
His first big product category launch, I would say, with the watch.
Okay.
And they brought out U2 at the end.
Oh, I loved it.
Which was amazing. You know, everyone expected Apple to announce 2 iPhone 6s, a large one and an extra large one, which they did. And people have been predicting an Apple Watch for a long time, and they finally delivered. I think the watch is, pretty interesting in terms of features. It's got pretty much everything you want. There's all kinds of clever integration with the iPhone and with various online services. They made a lot of this feature that they call the digital crown, which is basically a little scroll wheel on the side that lets you scroll through things.
Is it big, by the way? Or, I mean, we were just talking about it before the show started. Are my fat fingers going to be able to control it very well?
I think so, yeah. The problem is it's on the right of the phone. So if you are a lefty like I am and you're wearing the phone on your right hand, or you're wearing the watch on your right hand, you're going to have to reach over the face to reach the scroll wheel, which eliminates the whole point.
They didn't talk about customizing that today, did they?
No. It's also a little bit heavier and a little bit chunkier and a lot uglier than anyone expected it to be. If I had to compare it to anything, it looks sort of like one of the early generation iPods, sort of rounded and chunky. And unlovable, but sort of in a cute kind of way. So some people, Apple fans, will love it, but lots of other people are already saying it looks hideous compared to most of Apple's products.
So the real question is, it's like $349.
Yes, and you need an iPhone.
Right. And we know that you don't have an iPhone. We know that you have an Android, Dylan.
Well, I do. I have both now, but yes, I have an iPhone 4, which is too old to work with the new Apple Watch.
Right, which gets me angry anyway. But the big question I need to ask you is did you want to get one? And Dean was there, Mark was there. Were you guys saying, oh crap, I need to buy one as soon as I can get one?
I'm not hearing that from either of those guys, and I'm not feeling it myself, although I do feel the usual sort of post-Apple halo, I do kind of want one, but I don't know if I'm ready to plunk down $350 plus $200 plus a 2-year contract for a new phone just to get this watch. I just don't know that I need to quantify my life that much. And as cute as it is, I mean, there's some really nice features that they baked in. Like you can, it has a touch screen, so you can draw little pictures and send them to your friends. And cute. You can tap on it, and your friend will feel the tapping on their watch at the same time. So people will come up with all kinds of creative uses for that, I'm sure. Okay,
the one thing I must totally say is I love the fact that during one demo, they said, do you want to play the song Love Shack or Wild Thing? That was a text message that someone had received.
Yes.
And the options to reply were you can hit Love Shack, Wild Thing, or some other answer.
I don't know.
And the fact is they were able to parse those entities, those songs, and offer them up. That's natural language processing at work. And a few geeks on Twitter like me picked up on it and got really excited. That was a new feature.
That is brilliant. And you don't necessarily need a watch to do that kind of thing.
That's right.
I will say the phone also has some other interesting features in it. In terms of photography, it's got improved facial detection, improved focusing. There's a lot of intelligence going into these devices.
Okay.
The one feature that I think the iPhone 6 does need, since they can do facial recognition, they should do nudity recognition. So if your body is too naked, they should say, it looks like you're naked. You might not want to upload this to iCloud right now.
Celebrities would appreciate that.
Yeah, exactly. The celebrity nudity feature. So I'm going to tell people what to think about the new iPhones. These are great phones. The watch is a pretty good watch. And when they come out, when the watch comes out next year, I'm certain that a lot of people will buy it.
Sure.
But the thing that's really going to make a difference is tap to pay with Apple Pay and NFC, which I should point out, VentureBeat's Mark Sullivan was first to break the news that the iPhone 6 would have an NFC chip in it. All the Apple blogs mocked him for this, but it turns out he was right. And Apple has a really, really impressive lineup of partners, all the major banks, all the major credit card issuers, Walgreens and Duane Reade, McDonald's,
Whole Foods,
Disney. All these companies are supporting tap to pay with an iPhone 6 or with this watch. So I think that's going to make a serious dent in terms of how people pay for things.
And I think they are a few points ahead of Google in terms of getting a wallet feature to work with lots of partnerships. For sure, they're ahead.
Way ahead. And they certainly know how to popularize things and make them look sexier than Google does.
Right.
Let's move on to one more story. I think we don't have time for 3 because we spent so much time raving about Apple's event. Let's talk about LucidWorks. Jordan, this is a story that you broke last week.
Yes.
And took some heat for.
Yes.
What's the story with LucidWorks?
Well, first of all, let me just explain that they sell enterprise search software, which means that we, as VentureBeat.com, could integrate search functionality into our website, or like VentureBeat software application that we run in our own data center.
Okay, and they would provide the search behind that. Okay.
Yeah, and it's based on open source software, which gives it a dependency.
Called Lucene.
Lucene, yes. And Solar as well. Those two projects.
Yes.
And so there are other companies that provide, special versions of open source search software, including Elasticsearch. And some companies have been shifting over from LucidWorks to Elasticsearch, for example. And basically, Google and Microsoft have made this market very difficult. Microsoft gave enterprise search software away for free a few years ago. And since then, it's like, why should I pay money through LucidWorks or any other company?
Right.
So these guys who are still charging, it's tough for them, tough market. And so what has happened basically is, from my perspective, I rarely hear about LucidWorks. When I talk to startups about what you're implementing in your app, it's not LucidWorks. Elasticsearch is popping up more and more. And so
Elasticworks just raised
$70 million.
$70 million versus the $8 million that LucidWorks just raised.
Right. So let me get to that. What ended up happening is they wanted to raise $30 to $50 million in venture funding. This is LucidWorks. It kind of in retaliation or in response to Elasticsearch's big round. They got $8 million out of a $12 million round last month.
Which is not bad.
Yeah, it's money. Basically, what I understand is it might be able to keep the lights on. But not much more than that, because the sales guys just are not great at recruiting new business. They have been, dropping their pants, as far as I understand, to really get deals to close.
Which means lowering your prices.
Yeah, dropping them by half, 50% or something like that. And they're basically desperate and going after lead accounts, big accounts like Apple.
Yes. You documented some customers that they'd lost, right? Like
yes.
Nordstrom, I think.
And
right?
The Guardian.
And The Guardian.
Yeah. The Guardian has basically started using Elasticsearch as well. They still have some use, as far as I understand, of Solar and Lucene. But anyway, the point is basically the company has a lot of issues, including 2 lawsuits they're facing, including 2 rounds of layoffs by the new CEO who came on a few months ago and is making a lot of people feel weird because he never was a CEO before. He doesn't really have that kind of experience. And so there have been a lot of strange, goings on, and even in the development department, they rarely, month after month, hit their deadlines to ship software, new versions of LucidWorks. So it's really messy over there. I'm not sure how long they're going to be around. They've been around since '07, and
we should note that the company vehemently, they didn't exactly respond to the points you made, but they vehemently denied and kind of mocked the story. So we may hear from them yet. We'll see. But go read the story. It's on VentureBeat.com. Pretty hard-hitting reporting by Jordan, who talked to a bunch of former employees as well as former customers and current customers.
Thanks, Dylan.
Yeah. And now a quick thanks to our host and sponsor, New Relic. We are in the New Relic podcasting studio here. New Relic is a software analytics company that makes sense of billions of pieces of data across millions of web and mobile apps. And they have an event coming up, and they are offering listeners to VentureBeat's What to Think podcast a special discount to attend FutureStack 14, which is their annual technology and user conference happening at the Fort Mason Center, October 8th and 9th in San Francisco. This is your chance to join more than 1,000 technologists, developers, sysadmins, DevOps people, and a whole bunch of other folks, and learn from them about the great things that they're doing with software and data. To get this coupon, just go to newrelic.com or futurestack.io, and the first 25 people to register using the promo code VentureBeat will get 50% off beta tickets. We hope to see you there. And now I'd like to welcome our guest, Kathleen McGee. She's the Internet Bureau Chief at the Office of the New York Attorney General. Kathleen has been involved in a number of things with the Attorney General's office, working with Internet companies to help define what laws mean in the Internet sphere, where they are not always clearly defined. And the Attorney General's office has had some really interesting news regarding AstroTurf reviews, Facebook gun sales, as well as Airbnb and Uber policies and other things like that. So thank you very much for joining us, Kathleen.
It's my pleasure.
First of all, what does the Internet Bureau do? Just briefly, I don't know that every Attorney General's office even has an Internet Bureau. So
how many do have Internet bureaus anyway?
I don't know how many do. I know that not all do. And I know that our goal is really twofold here in the administration. One is, we're part of New York State's largest law enforcement agency, so where there is a law in the books, we're obliged to enforce it. But in the Internet law sphere, and in terms of civil enforcement on the Internet, there's not a lot of law. So we have a really great opportunity in our Bureau to be innovative where we see a problem and reach out to the private sector and sort of engage in some public-private discourse.
Give us an example of what that means, that sort of public-private discourse, and defining something that might have been sort of fuzzy in the online sphere.
Absolutely. I think the most recent and relevant subject would be Ask FM and the acquisition by IAC and one of their companies, Ask.com, of Ask FM.
Ask FM is the sort of site that's used by lots of teenagers to, ask questions like, do you think this dress looks pretty, or should I dump this boy, and that kind of thing, right?
I'm glad you knew that, Dylan, because as a non-teenager, I had no clue what you were talking about.
Well, I live with a teenager.
Right.
And she wanted to be on Ask FM, and I won't let her because it has a very bad reputation.
It has had a bad reputation in the past, and it's due in part to one, it's anonymous postings, and the theory is that teenagers, in particular, like the security of being anonymous when they're asking questions that might be sensitive online. I can think back vaguely to being a teenager, and I do, that theory resonates. But the problem was that as a company, previously, Ask FM had a reputation for really not putting any afterthought into the product that they were turning out. So if Ask FM became a site for cyberbullying, and the cyberbullying in turn was attributed to several teen suicides, most notably one in the United Kingdom that actually got the attention of the Prime Minister there as well. So
they did essentially no moderation even after that came out, right? They were still taking a very hands-off approach. So,
I would say that's a fair statement, yeah. So what was interesting about what IAC did was that they approached the Attorney General's office and said that they were interested in making an acquisition and that they wanted to engage in a conversation and collaboration about how to be a better website and how to be a better company. And I would point out that there is no law on point here. What we ended up doing was working collaboratively with IAC and Ask.com and coming up with a really great set of best practices that included not only a safety panel that is comprised of really respected people in the field, suicide prevention watch, collaboration with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So we're talking about really strong decisions by an already strong company who decided that they cared not just about the success financially, I would venture to say, and I don't want to speak for IAC, but from a law enforcement perspective, what a smart decision.
Does that happen often? Do companies actually say, hey, Attorney General's office, can you help us sort out the legalities of this before we acquire this company?
I have to say it probably happens more than the average citizen or average listener might think.
Really?
Yeah, no, it does. And I think that it's because we all recognize that we all have common problems, and law enforcement is often a good place to turn to when you want to answer. Don't we all have a lawyer in the family that we turn to when we have a legal question?
Right.
So is that the way that it worked with Uber? I know there were some issues with car sharing recently in New York, and I wonder if it was you guys who went to them or if they actually came to the Internet Bureau knowing that it was there.
I think it was something, and it's actually before my time, but I can tell you that it was a product of Superstorm Sandy. So it was something that was unmistakably there. It was surge pricing, and it was surge pricing at a time of catastrophic events in New York City. So it was hard to ignore. And
they took a lot of heat for that, too, as I recall.
Well, they did, and they came to the table and had a really meaningful discussion with the administration. And Attorney General Eric Schneiderman came to them and said, look, it's this practice that we're talking about. It's not the Uber practice, it's surge pricing. And they came to a resolution that was a joint decision. What we read about wasn't really what happened. It was a collaborative effort to try to solve the problem of surge pricing, and Uber took charge.
Does that mean that they don't surge price in New York anymore, or does that mean that they don't surge price when hurricanes are threatening the city?
I think it's fair to say that they're sensitive to the issue of surge pricing, and they're going to be really careful about the conditions under which they raise and lower their prices.
Okay. Isn't that strange? I think someone was right today. I saw on Twitter someone said Uber is possibly the most unethical company of our time.
Well, I'm not going to comment on that. I don't know. I'm here to talk about innovation and collaboration, not necessarily whether or not a company is ethical or not.
Right, because you don't necessarily want to or need to take a point of view on that. Let's move to the story. VentureBeat did a lot of coverage of gun sales happening or being facilitated on Facebook because the transactions weren't actually closed on Facebook, but people would sort of find buyers through these Facebook gun enthusiast groups, many of which sort of encouraged people to advertise weapons that they had for sale, and then people could arrange offline exchanges that would sometimes be in violation of various state or federal laws. But you guys worked with Facebook to come up with some changes to their policy, right?
That's correct. This was an effort not just by Eric Schneiderman's administration, but by a lot of the gun groups who are concerned about gun safety, moms demanding action for gun sense.
Right. Former Mayor Bloomberg. Right.
Correct. Yeah. The Mayors Against Illegal Guns, to name just two of the groups. Facebook and Instagram were at the table and developed a series of behind-the-scenes screenings. And this, again, was a collaborative, ongoing discussion. There wasn't any law. It was, we have a problem, and we'd like you to help us solve it. And remember, this was, as you probably know, on the heels of a really horrible set of events.
Sandy Hook, yes.
Yeah, and companies really responded. So this is an ongoing collaboration.
I should make clear to the listeners that Sandy Hook had nothing to do with Facebook. I don't think there was a connection there, but just other than people were thinking about guns, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so the discussion was ongoing, and it's not an isolated incident. By that I mean it's not the only time that social media or other companies are going to be talking to law enforcement and advocacy groups about concerns that we have and how we can make internet-based companies and systems better for the user and better for the company.
I imagine Oh, let me just ask you, how long has this Internet Bureau been around, by the way?
It's been around since the Spitzer administration.
Okay, so we're going back a few years then. How many years is that? It's 8, 7, 6?
Beyond that.
Beyond that, okay. So it's been around. I mean, I'm just wondering, basically, as we see these companies that are totally flipping around the way life was before, like Uber, where you order a cab through a phone, or Airbnb, where you stay at someone's house, like instead of staying at a hotel, you're going to run into more regulatory issues in this kind of environment. Like a couple of weeks ago, we had the new batch of Y Combinator, where all these startups were Uber for so-and-so. And basically life is being totally changed. I'm trying to figure out if you guys, as the doormat for all these internet companies that are totally changing the world, if you guys are getting more cases than ever before, the way that I imagine the world is changing faster than it was changing even 2 or 3 years ago.
I think to answer your question, I would say that we acknowledge a rapid evolution in internet-based industry, or brick-and-mortar industry that has an internet connection in really unthought of ways before. And we understand that the law isn't there to play catch-up with just how fast things are evolving in internet-based industry. I wouldn't say that we have more cases than ever before. We have different cases, but we also have different issues. And one of our goals is to evolve as an institution with the internet and to work with these companies to try to come up with best practices where we know that the law isn't going to provide coverage for anybody. Imagine being a company who doesn't know where the wall is or where the line that shouldn't be crossed is, because there's no line. And having a law enforcement entity that's willing to work collaboratively with them to find another way.
Well, I think the message is coming across very clearly. You're not out to get these internet companies and nail them for violating obscure laws, right? You're looking for a way to make laws relevant, to the internet sphere, and do so in a way that is more collaborative with these companies, right?
That's right.
So are there areas, though, I mean, clearly many of the laws in our land, whether New York state laws or federal laws or local laws, are not made with, the internet in mind. Are there areas where you feel like legislation really is needed to help things catch up?
Well, I would venture to say that almost any attorney general's office is concerned with privacy. And, we came out with a report a couple months ago on data and data breach, and it's continuing to be an issue that we're looking at as technology evolves into the Internet of Things, into wearable technologies, and into our everyday lives on a more and more mainstream basis. One of our primary concerns is consumer awareness, and the other one is helping companies to be the best company they can be by mainstreaming common sense privacy practices. And that's something that we're going to be continuing to press forward with.
One thing that I've been curious about, where companies or tech companies are running into regulatory questions that they're having to deal with on basically a place-by-place basis, is this idea about what happens to data after death. So if my mom dies, what happens to all the information that a company collected on her? Where does New York sit with this data after death question?
Well, it's something that we're working on and looking into. Again, this isn't something where there's standard law in place. This is something that I think that there were a couple articles actually fairly recently, again, within the past couple of months, on this very issue, where you have a family member who dies and they have a Facebook page up, and how do you deal with that? And some companies are more responsive and sensitive to it than others. I'm not singling out Facebook or any other company. I'm just saying generally, we haven't taken a firm position yet. It's something, again, where we're trying to figure out, is there a best way? And who has the legal authority to remove stuff? We don't have a right to be forgotten, as the European Union does. So how do we here in the United States preserve privacy rights and the rights of a corporate entity to engage in their practices, and what happens when someone's no longer there to control their own personal information anymore? Those are big questions. They're philosophical questions, frankly.
Privacy is a really interesting thing to me, because I think lots of us in the media care a lot about it, but I see very little evidence that ordinary consumers care much about it. except when, iCloud gets hacked and a bunch of celebrity photos get out there, and then people are like, oh my God, what if that happened to my photos? But there are big issues.
Yeah, I would say it's perhaps more fair to the consumer to say that they're not really aware of how deeply integrated their private information is with mainstream. When there's nothing necessarily free about our usage. Everything in our data is used in a myriad of ways, commercially or otherwise. So sometimes consumers maybe aren't as aware of how information is being used when they're using an app or a website, as maybe they should be. And I would consider that one of the goals of the Internet Bureau, for the consumer awareness.
Yeah, that's a big part of your job, just making people know how their data is being used. How much of what you do would you say is sort of self-initiated or initiated by the companies that you work with versus, complaints from somebody just dialing in or emailing in and saying, I have a problem with this company?
That's a great question. I would say it's a 50-50 split. We have a serious and robust complaint system, and people from throughout New York State call, and it runs everything from a more standard consumer frauds type complaint on something that has happened in a internet type situation to something more like extortion on the internet. We really run the gamut, and we are obliged to respond to each and every one of those. So I have a complaint team, and I have a legal team, and then some investigators, and we spend our time split between the complaints of the people of New York State and then some of these other issues that we are concerned about or that companies bring to us.
It sounds like you have a small army working on things over there, Kathleen.
It feels like it, yeah.
There's one thing I wanted to ask before our time is up. You mentioned when we were talking before this podcast on our pre-call, an operation, a program that you have called Operation Game Over, having to do with online games. So tell us about that.
Operation Game Over actually started in spring of 2012, and it was a really interesting relationship with companies that were involved and still are involved in the gaming industry online. So companies like Microsoft, Apple, Blizzard Entertainment, Warner Brothers, and some others. And we all knew that sex offenders were primarily grooming on online sites just like these gaming sites.
Oh, yikes.
We also knew, and that's a fairly known law enforcement issue. But we also knew that because sex offenders had to register, we did have some certain information about them. And collaboratively, we came up with a solution with the gaming industry where they now screen and they remove all known sex offenders from their gaming industry.
But you can identify them even if they log on as some weird handle random. You can figure out where that's coming from and identify the person.
Presumably, at a certain point, they're going to be using some identifying information that law enforcement has on record. And that information was then, through an arrangement with the gaming industry, provided to them on a limited basis so that they could screen out people who really shouldn't be there. And really just make it a safer space for people who are interested in just gaming. And it really, frankly, it makes you a better company. So that's an ongoing affair, and it's been going on since 2012. And it's one of those things that gets attention when it first happens, and it doesn't get attention after that. And it shouldn't necessarily get attention. It's just making that space a better space. But it's an ongoing effort, and those companies should be applauded.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that seems like a very good outcome.
Yeah.
I think that's about all the time that we have for. So, Kathleen, thank you so much for taking time to join us and talk to our audience about the good work that the Attorney General's office does. And we look forward to hearing more news out of your office. I think you guys issue maybe a dozen press releases a day. So
it seems like that sometimes. It was a real pleasure speaking with both of you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another exciting episode of What to Think, VentureBeat's Technology News Podcast. As always, you can find Jordan and me and the rest of the gang online at VentureBeat.com. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to our podcast in iTunes. It's awesome, and you'll get us every week. Catch you next week.
Bye-bye.